Clamp arms have been installed on the new test rig in Massey's. Work on the new OLM continues at Sanchez. Ongoing launch vehicle assembly shows no signs of slowing down at the build site, and all areas of the new orbital Pad B site are surging ahead. Welcome to episode 71 of Starbase Flyover Update. We'll cover all the Starship development from the 11th of January through the 24th. With nearly 2 weeks between flyovers and a launch in between, there's a lot to catch up on at Starbase in this episode. My name is BJ. Let's buckle up and enjoy the latest flight from 10,500 feet. We'll start our tour over at Massey's test facility. Before we dive in, let's have a quick look at a labeled map by Proky to get you oriented. A lot has changed in the interim between flights as SpaceX continues to progress. Let's begin at the Water Deluge Tank Farm, where new foundations have been completed and the new nitrogen tank has been installed. Moving over to the Methane Farm, CFA piles have been installed for what will be foundations for a new horizontal tank. You can see the embeds for it over by the old nose cone jail. The pile drilling rig is now being packed up and ready to be moved out. A crane can be seen lifting pipes into place near the old horizontal liquid oxygen tanks. These pipes will complete the gaseous oxygen generation system. The new storage area behind the tent is now being used for some of the many hydraulic actuators here at Massey's. Right below the booster cryo stand, construction on the new steel platform is ongoing. Its intended purpose isn't entirely clear at this stage. One possibility, as illustrated by Chrome Kiwi, is that it might serve as an adapter for mounting various types of test articles. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think it might be? Let us know in the comments below. At the structural test stand, most of the new arms spotted in the last flyover have been installed, as well as the actuators in between the arms. Work is resumed on the older can crusher, with the outer 20 pull-down rams being installed. This seems to coincide with the Test Tank 16 returning to the Starfactory. One thing to note though is this test article has a ship-style aft section, so it is still unclear if they are related. Finally for Massey's, over near the entrance, some frames are under construction. Before moving on, let's take a quick look over at the commercial site near the Rocket Ranch outpost. Closest to Highway 4, you can see one of the footings has been poured with concrete and 3 more are being prepared. One thing to note is the rebar extending out of the concrete that will form pillars to elevate the building above the flood height. The pile drilling continues further along. On the other side of the site, the construction work continues, with it being clear that these buildings are 2 stories. Framework has started on the next 2, with new timber piles on the opposite side of this area. Earthwork continues on the remaining central section of the site. And now, on to Sanchez. Thanks again to Proky for supplying this labeled map. Crew have been super busy at this site since the last flyover. Let's start at the OLM for Pad B, where welding tents have gone up to weld all pancake sections together. This shouldn't take too long, as these sections aren't very thick. Some of the manifolds that we have seen previously are for water supply to the pancake. Their flat part will be welded on the side of the pancake, and on the 24th, we saw this one being lifted into place. Over by the old chopstick area, you can see the water distribution manifold to connect to the pancake manifolds. Here's another render by Chrome Kiwi over on X, showing how these 2 manifold parts will interconnect. At the flame bucket assembly area, piping has started to be installed on one of the halves. There are many more to be installed very soon, so we'll keep an eye out on this progress. Nearby, one of the end plates for what is expected to be the ridge of the flame bucket can be seen now welded to a short flanged pipe. Recent observations have suggested that the new heat exchangers for the launch site have 2 separate loops. The ones at the launch site have both circuits of the same size, while the third subcooler here appears to have 2 different size circuits indicated by the spacing of the exhaust ports on top. The larger one for booster methane supply and the other for ship methane supply. New white structures have been installed on the 4 corners of the speculated PEZ loader component. We are unsure if this is a transport stand or a lifting rig. Let's see what this turns out to be after final assembly. Rolling to the Starlink ground station, the 3 antennas we saw during the last flyover have been installed on the east side of the array. The major change this week is that both of the chopsticks and the carriage were moved to the launch site ahead of final assembly and integration with the tower. The stabilization arms for the Pad B chopsticks can be seen here ahead of assembly. The ship quick disconnect arm has been painted black, signaling that its welding work has been completed. We still don't see any sign of the QD arm extension though. Looking to each side of the inventory tent, we see that 2 new cryogenic pumps and casings were delivered. These could be part of the tank farm expansion or to replace current ones. We'll have to keep an eye on that. At the scrapyard, the Booster 14.1 test article has started its scrapping process. To the side, we found one of the 4-point lifting frames laying next to Ship 32. It's possible this is to make modifications for lifting ships from their catch points instead of the current lift sockets. At the rocket garden, Booster 12 has come back from Mega Bay 1. As we expected, it's using the old booster transport stand that Booster 14.1 was previously mounted on. Finally, at the parking garage, some of the panels were blown out, likely due to high winds during recent storms. With all that, let's move to the build site. Starting off at Mega Bay 2, Ship 34 remains in the bay after being rolled back from cryo-testing at Massey's last week. Ship 35 is taking shape, with its A3 section being the latest section to be stacked, having rolled into the Mega Bay on January 28th. The ship transfer tube installation jig would make an appearance during the shuffle, with the 3 RVAC tubes already loaded. The center transfer tube would be fitted soon after going back into the bay. Bonus activity in this clip is the movement of 2 sea level Raptors passing Mega Bay 2 and into the factory. While waiting for the center transfer tube, an RVAC engine crosses the door towards Ship 34. Thanks to Lab Padre for this footage of their Rover 1 camera. Refer to this diagram by Jax for the barrel terminology of ships. Over at Mega Bay 1, Booster 15 continues its assembly on the back right stand. The grid fins sitting outside the bay are most likely to be for it. They were moved inside the day after this flyover. Due to the closed door, there have been no noticeable changes with Booster 16, but a single bar load spreader was seen exiting Mega Bay 1 on the 23rd, indicating it has been moved to the center workstation. The downcomer for Booster 17 was moved to the bay on January 23rd as this booster continues to be stacked. The LOX tank raceway and press pipes were also fitted on January 27th. These installations should ready the tank to be mated with its aft section on the now vacant turntable on the left of the bay. The high bay remains empty of vehicle parts ever since Booster 14.1, a prototype booster test article, was rolled out in early January. With the last of the flight-ready Block 1 ships gone, it raises the question of what will become of the high bay. In this photo, you can just see that the new Starlink PEZ loader frame looks a little more complete with the side panels attached. This past week, we saw an FAA filing for a proposed Gigabay at SpaceX's Roberts Road facility in Florida. Construction is set to start in April of 2025 and finish by August of the following year. Notably, the bay is planned to have a height of 380 feet or 116 meters, which is more than enough to accommodate Block 3 boosters. We saw a reference to a Starbase Gigabay in a job posting by SpaceX last November. Where do you think this building will be located? And what will its purpose be? A vertical integration facility, perhaps? Moving on to the Starfactory, this overhead view shows the finished footprint of the building compared to the same month last year. Looking to the east end of the building, the roof of the office building is nearing completion, as well as the black cladding on the backside of the taller section of the factory connector. We can see the insulated open section of the roof hasn't been outfitted with equipment. In front of the office building, additional concrete has been poured with the planting of palm trees and lawn. It looks like the building could be ready for employees in the coming weeks. Around behind the factory, you can see that the storm wall and walkway are nearing completion, with the crew accessing the final part from this end now. Stopping at the rec center, we can see the swimming pools, shower wall, and amenities facility are still being worked on. The coping tiles around the perimeter of the 3 pools have been laid. Before moving on, this flyover was made possible by our paid supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Consider supporting us to gain access to high-quality photo galleries and roundtable discussion the same day we fly. Now let's move on to the launch site. Here's this week's labeled map of the launch site to get your bearings. Teams wasted no time after Flight 7 to get back to projects all over the site. At the flame trench, excavation on the final shape of the trench is now commenced. At the top of the ramp, Several concrete pours have happened to form the rat slab that the final concrete formwork and rebar cages will be prepared on. Toward the center of the trench, the excavator is working to remove soil to the depth required, with the tops of the piles installed months ago finally appearing. To the south of the tower, the area coated in concrete during our last flyover is now formed and an extensive rebar cage has been assembled. If we take a second look from the south, we can see several embed plates next to the forms in line with the covered piles. Over each row of 3 piles, the rebar is a little denser, creating a grade beam of stronger concrete, likely for distributing the weight of future hardware. Next to the trench, assembly of the Tower 2 chopsticks is rapidly progressing. During the flyover, we can see the carriage had already been lifted vertical on the taller jig beam. The left arm of the chopsticks was being attached to the Buckner LR11000 and was lifted into place on the jig. Later in the day, the right arm would be attached to the SpaceX LR11000 and be lifted into place where the hinge pins would be installed overnight. On January 26th, the full assembly was secured to the jig beams enough for the cranes to be released, and the Buckner crane would lift a reconfigured set of rigging for the final lift. In this clip from Lab Padre's lab cam, we can see the chopsticks assembly lifted from the jig to the tower on January 27th. Once the assembly was close enough to the tower, it was pinned into place on the skates installed over the previous days. As always, thanks to Vix for capturing this time lapse. Near Highway 4, a new area of concrete is being excavated. This is believed to be for a new power distribution bunker. At the fluids bunker, trench work has now begun to the western side now that the main trench from the tank farm is complete. The excavation appears to be the start of the trench that will continue towards the already started launch mount culvert. As seen in many recent flyovers, the main propellant culvert is being filled with pipework, with progress reaching the second expansion loop. New work this week is the installation of 2 sets of concrete footings for what is expected to be the water tanks for the Pad B flame bucket and launch mount steel plate. At the port, one of 2 tanks arriving during the flyover was seen being transferred from the transport dolly trailer to a long modular hydraulic trailer. Meanwhile, at the port connector road area, the second deluge tank is arriving by truck. Following the trailer transfers, both tanks were parked here next to the other vertical tanks. We see here that the 2 larger vertical tanks are now fully outfitted with pipework. Moving back to the launch site, here's a quick sketch of how the deluge tanks will fit with those foundations. Near the D2 entrance gate, the prop farm expansion is making big strides. A large rectangle has been excavated in preparation of a new pad. Early speculation is that this is where the pumps for Pad B may be located. To the front of the subcoolers, a smaller pad is formed and rebar is being prepared for concrete. To the side of this area, 6 elevated stands delivered on the site before Flight 7 are now arranged, with 4 of them loaded with new vaporizers. The remaining 2, seen staged by Highway 4 here, would be loaded as well later in the day. Along the back of this area, the removal of concrete continues. This strip is in line with the protection wall, suggesting this wall is about to get a little longer. Following initial boring of electrical wiring under Highway 4 in recent weeks, the space in front of the tank farm is being outfitted with new conduit runs and junction vaults to help support the power needs of all the new tank farm systems being installed. From this angle, we also get a good view of where the high-pressure tank racks have been placed under the first 2 liquid nitrogen tanks. As we wrap our tour of the launch site, Pad A seems to have performed nominally. The OLM shows the signs of another successful booster catch. However, all work observed on this pad seems to be the ordinary refurbishment. The booster alignment pins have been reinstalled, and the normal ring of scaffolding has been placed for access to the clamps and Raptor quick disconnects, as well as the top deck safety rails. Before we sign off, let's highlight some of the key moments of Flight 7. Initial ascent to the stack proceeded nominally, with Booster 14 returning to the tower for a second successful catch by the chopsticks. Just as the booster was hanging safely from the chopsticks, the fate of Ship 33 would begin to unravel as Raptor engines would begin shutting down unexpectedly around the T plus 7 minutes and 30 second mark, until only a single RVAC remained when the on-screen telemetry froze, indicating that communication with the ship may have been lost. The destructive outcome would later be observed by multiple witnesses in the Turks and Caicos Islands, as well as nearby cruise ships and aircraft. Ship 33 broke up, resulting in a spectacular streak of debris that passed over the islands into the Atlantic Ocean, with many reports of heat shield tiles and other small debris being discovered. SpaceX would later report that a fire developed in the aft of the ship, leading to a rapid unscheduled disassembly. That's it for episode 71 of Starbase Flyover Update. Thank you for choosing to fly with RGV aerial photography, and I hope you enjoyed the flight. If you liked what you saw today, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe so you get notified of future videos and weekly live streams. I've been BJ, and I hope to see you next time from 10,500 feet.